on BBC4, with some strong language, we meet Peggy Guggenheim, art addict.
Is it working?
Okay. I think, yeah. I have to check the battery. That means it's working.
Oh, good.
Your boss had said your greatest achievement was your discovery of pollock.
Yeah, I think so.
And your collection?
That's my second achievement.
I've noticed that you gave first exhibitions to Anne Kaufman and Clifford Still and
Graziotti's,
remarkable
Motherwell,
list.
Rothko, and Pollock.
I think she was most proud of her achievement with Pollock, because nobody believed in Pollock the way she did.
She started with a very mixed bag of paintings, and she bought much more cleverly as she went on. In the end, she really seemed to know what she was doing.
It seems to me that you have an intuition for talent even before it's realized.
Yes, maybe. I think I got interested in modern art the minute I got into it. You know, I became an addict and I sort of couldn't help it anymore.
She wanted to come into her own as her own person, and art became the vehicle. She wanted this art as a mirror for her own strangeness.
It's a very fulfilled career to be involved with the surrealists and then the abstract expressionists. So she begins in one place, and she ends up in another place. She's a bridge character.
You don't have to paint a figure in order to express human feelings.
Modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world.
Did you feel it was a crazy life?
Definitely, yes. It was all about art and love.
I think that she did remarkably well for someone who had no art historical training, who had no really sort of innate taste or flair for things, but who had a passion to use art to promote herself and turn herself into a personality, to a star. She could, because of her lack of beauty, she was never going to make it as a siren, as a desirable, glamorous social figure. But by God, she made it as a collector, and as a kind of collector that had never quite existed before.
Peggy, being a bit of a narcissist, was absolutely delighted at the idea of having a biographer. She called me her last great friend, and when people would call in the afternoon or come to see her, she'd say, "I'm with my biographer." Peggy appealed to me because of her eccentricities, and she had just a wonderfully colorful family.
both sides of Peggy's family came over and started off as peddlers, really, selling door to door. In the case of her mother's family, the Seligmans, they went into banking. And her father's family, the Guggenheims, they went into mining. And within 50 years, they progressed from selling door to door to having these enormous fortunes.
Even though the Guggenheims became much wealthier than the Seligmans looked down on them because they had come later. Her mother, Florette, was one of the youngest of the James Seligman children, and they were all highly eccentric. Florette would repeat everything 3 times.
She wore 3 watches.
Incredible. She wore 3 coats.
Yes, she did everything 3 times. Freud could explain it probably, yes.
Peggy's aunts and uncles were all famously off their rockers. There was another aunt, Fanny, who used to sing all her phrases, and so she'd arrive at somebody's house and say, "Hello, I'm here." Her husband was driven so nuts by her that he tried to kill her with a baseball bat. And since that didn't work, he then drowned himself with weights in the New York City reservoir. Ben, Peggy's father, was highly established by the time that Peggy was born. She had 2 sisters, Benita and Hazel, and she adored Benita.
Had no other friends.
Didn't your mother invite little girls over to play with you?
Never.
They lived like royalty. They had beautiful carriages, mansions on Fifth Avenue, nannies, servants galore. Joseph Seligman was great friends of Ulysses S. Grant and would entertain him.
It was very bourgeois, very dull.
The Guggenheim brothers, in addition to being known for their financial acumen and money, were also known to have multiple affairs.
I was so precocious. I set a table one night to my father. "You must have mistress because you go out every night." And I was banished from the dining room table and went and hid in the sitting room under the piano and wept. I adored my father. When he came home, he used to whistle going up the stairs, and then I ran out to meet him.
When Ben Guggenheim went down in the Titanic, and his brothers went to see who was rescued on the Carpathia, down came his mistress, who was paid off by the Guggenheims to keep quiet.
You must have been extremely shocked when he died on the Titanic.
Yes.
Did you feel angry and mad at your father for not trying to save himself more? He gave away his life vest.
How could I be angry? I thought he was very noble.
I read in your autobiography about when you were a child, you suffered a terrible depression.
I had a nervous breakdown. I just went around worrying all the time. My mother was no comfort.
Would you say your mother was a good mother?
I didn't have any good mothers in those days.
Did she have any control over you, or did you pretty
No,
much do what you wanted?
she had very little control over me. My mother drove me crazy. She fussed all the time, and she bored me, so it was awful. My father had a fortune which he lost. Didn't ever consider myself a real Guggenheim anymore after that. I was very poor compared to my uncles. They were so madly rich and only had $450,000.
And she wasn't a rich Guggenheim. People thought she was, but she was not anything like as rich as most of the Guggenheims.
I'm sure the poor Guggenheim was relative. I mean, she wasn't in any way poor.
I first met Peggy Guggenheim in the 70s, early 70s. I liked her because I sort of felt sorry for her. I mean, there was a kind of vulnerability about her. She had this very strange accent. And I once said to her, "Where did you get that weird way of talking?" And she said there was one school on West 72nd Street that about 9 of us went to, and that we were all super rich Jewish girls, and we all learned to talk this way, and we still do.
Peggy loved to shock and be the center of attention. She shaved off her eyebrows when she was in school, and that became a cause célèbre because that was so avant-garde. And so Peggy was always a rebel.
She was supposed to inherit money and marry someone who also inherited money. And she, at some point early in her life, decided that that was not going to be who she was. When she was in her early 20s, she went to work at that bookstore, Sunwise Church.
I've always been considered the enfant terrible of the Guggenheim family. I guess they thought I was sort of black sheep and would never do anything that was any good. I think I surprised them.
Then you wind up in Paris.
Yes.
Did you feel you were a lost girl, looking for something to fill your life?
Oh, yes. It's very strange, isn't it? I seem to move through life in a kind of dream.
Paris, it was just the most exciting place culturally in the world at that point. And not only in the visual arts, it was going on in music and ballet and theater and everything else.
Paris était une ville libre, une ville ouverte, que d'ailleurs nous avons prise puisque toute la révolution de l'art s'est produite à cette époque.
Schrunkta, Dada.
Italique, terrassique, métallique, historique.
Dadaism is really coming out of this atrocity of World War I. Just the senseless amount of death and bloodshed. And also the sickness and twistedness of the propaganda. So they're creating this language of disillusionment, of this kind of utter disgust with what the civilized world is doing.
She found the whole bohemian life there to be this alternative to the bourgeois or the haute bourgeois life that she had always found herself to be an outsider in anyway. And so she immediately felt, these are my people.
Saw the picture of you by Man Ray.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Gorgeous.
Ah, so beautiful.
I was going to ask you what you were thinking of when you took that picture.
God knows.
And I love
I think I must have known I look gorgeous.
Artists from all over Europe and the United States were making their way to Paris as though there was some magnet pulling them.
What world did people like? What was Kiki like?
She was fantastic looking. No one's painted as much as Kiki.
And Man Ray, I heard he never lost his Brooklyn accent, although he comes from Philadelphia.
Never.
What was James Joyce like? I've read about all his singing Irish songs and doing jigs and...
Yes. Oh, that's true, yes.
And Pound. A touch of...
Pound. Oh, yes, I knew Pound, yes. He used to play tennis with Pound. And he used to crow like a cock whenever he made a point.
Had you ever considered going to college?
Yes, but my sister talked me out of it. I consider myself self-educated.
When you sat in the cafes, you absorbed surrealism and you absorbed cubism. You absorbed the ideas of the time.
There I met my husband, my future husband, Lawrence Vale, who was a writer and a painter. He belonged to a very bohemian world. I was a virgin, and I wanted to get rid of my virginity. And that was what I used Lawrence Vale for. Yes, he took me to the top of the Eiffel Tower where he proposed to me. And then I ended up by marrying him. And I got 2 children, Begin and Sinbad. We had terrible fights all the time. The fights were so many and so awful and so insane.
Did he beat you up, really?
Yes, but I don't think he beat me up once. He walked on my stomach once 4 times. Once he put me in the bathtub and kept me underwater a long time. But I don't think otherwise he was brutal to me. He had no money. Maybe because I was awful with him about money, he made me try to feel inferior about my brains all the time. And after 7 years, we were divorced.
You wrote that, oh, husbands always get better.
Better afterwards, yeah. Oh, he became my best friend afterwards, yes.
Afterwards,
yes. He asked me to stop beating me up.
Who has been the most important man in your life? Or can you answer that question?
Yes, but that wasn't an artist, that was a writer. Someone, an Englishman who's dead, who's been dead 30 years. I was very happy with John Holmes. He was very brilliant. People were spellbound by his conversation. So it was just like God, he was so superhuman.
Did he love you?
Yeah, terribly. He instructed me what to think and what to do and everything.
How did he mold you?
Well, he had to make me a more serious person, but less trivial. He was a wonderful sportsman. We used to climb rocks with my children.
Was he fond of your children?
Oh, yes.
Did they love him?
Yes.
Why did you let go of Sinbad? Did they make you do that because Sinbad stayed with the father and then Begin stayed with you?
First of all, I thought I wouldn't know how to bring up a son. And then I thought it was only fair to give Sinbad to Lawrence. And then if I hadn't given him up, I would have had to give up John Holmes.
Why would you have had to give up John Holmes?
Because the court wouldn't allow me to have a lover and have my child also.
It's pretty terrible.
Yes.
Today, I
don't think those things exist anymore, no.
No, that's true. I read about this abortion, too. I think you wrote about it.
I had so many abortions, my goodness. I think I had 7 abortions. I had most of them with Holmes.
Why? Did you not want to have a child with Holmes?
I didn't want to have a child because I wasn't married to him. Which was stupid, I think, now. But in those days, it meant more. Yeah.
And what about, why wouldn't he divorce Dorothy?
Oh, he would have divorced in the end. He was getting ready to, but he was so paralyzed in all his efforts that he couldn't get around to doing anything.
Her sister Benita died in childbirth, so Peggy was bereft. And something that does not appear in her memoirs is a glaring omission. But her sister Hazel went up to the roof of the Hotel Surrey, and she took her 3-year-old and her 1-year-old up there. But she was divorcing their father, Milton Waldman, and she'd gone around saying, I'd rather see the children dead than have Milton have them. So somehow, mysteriously, they wind up dead over the parapet.
I've had a lot of disappointments in life. I've had a very sad life, I think.
Playing Peggy Guggenheim, I got hooked on something mysterious about her, something enigmatic that to this day I don't entirely understand. She had this hunger, which is about life, pulling against this undertow of unbeatable sadness. So her sexual life was her way of connecting, humanly connecting.
Well, I had so many odd people. I used to tell them because I was lonely, I guess. I think I was sort of an nymphomaniac.
She wanted lovers. Everybody else had lovers. Why shouldn't she have one?
If I had one question for Peggy Guggenheim, it would probably be, how was Samuel Beckett in bed?
I suppose his conversation, his mind probably fascinated me more than anything else.
She said that she'd never met anyone like Beckett. They'd been in bed for 4 days, and the only time they separated was when he reached out the door to get the sandwiches the room service had sent for them.
I liked intellectual men. I liked very tall, dark, good-looking men. But all my lovers certainly were not that.
The artists, she loved them because they were artists, not because they were sexy men. I mean, they actually were sexy men. I think sex and art went absolutely hand in hand in her brain.
She went for the bad boys, and it didn't do her any good. I think art gave a meaning to her life, as well as confirmed the modern art, the avant-garde, confirmed her sense of being in some peculiar way an outsider. Art became her way of finding herself emotionally.
I was in search of an occupation and to have an interest, something to do. After my children were in boarding school and I was alone in the country in England, I came up to London and opened this art gallery in Cork Street called Guggenheim Jeune.
She's mulling around whether she should start a publishing company or an art gallery. And one of her friends says, well, start an art gallery, it's cheaper.
And did you really just think that the art gallery was going to be less expensive?
Yes. I mean, that's a crazy idea.
I read an account which said that your mother had died and therefore you had the funds to do the gallery.
Yes, I got another $450,000. I couldn't have done the gallery if she hadn't died. I wouldn't have had enough money.
Were you very affected, or?
Yes, I was, really.
She quite early on began to show the work of the European surrealists. A little exhibition for Cocteau. She was introduced to Tanguy. She knew André Breton already by this time.
How did Guggenheim Jeune change your former life? It must have been a dramatic difference.
Completely different, yes. I would adapt myself to everything very quickly.
Did you just plunge in and devote all your energy
Yes,
to it?
yes. Except the times that I ran to Paris to see Beckett.
Surrealists decided that the subconscious mind was the source of all great creativity, and this was the answer to the art of the future.
I think Peggy was a woman of great intuitions. She learned quite quickly what it meant to have an eye. She followed her own intuitions. She had the courage to do so, and that is a pattern that goes on throughout her life.
She wanted this outsider art that was then outrageous, that was different, strange art mirroring herself.
Peggy was absolutely at the cutting edge. She gave a huge number of shows at her gallery, and that alone was a major influence on British thinking about modern art. The English, who really, except for the 1936 Surrealist show at the Royal Academy, hadn't much idea about modern art. Most people thought it was rubbish.
Mrs. Guggenheim, but you might, as a patron, acquire a collection of rubbish. That's always possible.
Yes, of course, easily. If you have no taste and you don't know what you're doing and you don't take advice from the right people, you can get yourself in an awful lot of trouble.
Peggy Guggenheim really worked with a kind of consensus of advice. And it was only from artists and only from people she really respected. And the biggest voice in her head, the strongest advice, the one she probably took most often, was from Marcel Duchamp.
knew Marcel Duchamp since 1921. I met him because he was a boyfriend of one of my best friends, Mary Reynolds. And after that, we became great friends. He taught me everything about modern art that I know today. He taught me the difference between surrealism and abstract art. He arranged all my exhibitions, did everything for me. I don't know what I would have done without him, because he really was my great, great teacher.
I thought of the idea of a box in which they would be mounted like in a small museum.
Practically all your work is in here.
Practically all of it. I think very few things are missing. And there it is, the Mona Lisa with a mustache and a goatee. That was, of course, a great iconoclastic gesture on my part, and sacrilegious, blasphemous, all you want. The bottle rack was a perfect expression of the ready-made because it had no connection whatsoever with art.
The most mundane, everyday object could be elevated to fine art by the mere choice of an artist. And this is the Duchampian conceit that opens up a Pandora's box of future avenues for art.
Did you listen pretty much to everything Marcel?
Oh, yes, everything. Very clever of me, wasn't
it? Did he give you the impression of being brilliant?
I didn't realize then that he was so important. Only afterwards, Marcel became sort of a god in America, and then one began to realize how important he was.
Miss Guggenheim, in the gallery in London, who were some of the artists whom you introduced who created big excitement there?
Well, I suppose Kandinsky really was the most exciting. He had his first show in England in my gallery. During this period, Kandinsky asked me if I would ask my uncle, Solomon Guggenheim, to buy one of his early paintings, which he'd always wanted. So I asked him if he would like to buy this painting. I got an answer from him saying his curator, the Baroness Rebay, would send me her response. And this is it, which I shall now read. Dear Mrs. Guggenheim Jeanne, your gallery will be the last one of our foundation to use if ever the need should force us to use a sales gallery. You will soon find you are propagating mediocrity, if not trash.
Peggy's nemesis, in many ways, Hilary Bay, was the founding director of the Guggenheim here in New York. She was Solomon Guggenheim's advisor, and Solomon was Peggy's uncle.
Hilla, of course, was a dynamic person, I guess rather possessive, very assertive. She was a bombshell, and my grandfather was captivated by her.
Baroness was a fiend.
Who was his mistress, I gather, from
Well, no one knows, but everyone assumes she was. I suppose she didn't want him to have anything to do with me anyhow, because I was a sort of rival in art. She disapproved of me, yes.
They were both following different paths. They both had different ideas. Peggy was often considered to be the black sheep of the family.
So I wrote to the Baroness Rebay this response.
At Peggy's gallery in London, she gave a show of children's art, and it was the first show that anything by Lucian Freud was ever exhibited.
What was the inspiration for the children's exhibit?
Because Peggy painted, and I thought it'd be nice to have a lot of school children's pictures also. It was a beautiful exhibition.
Do you think she painted to please you?
No. Peggy was really a painter. No one ever influenced her. She was absolutely self-taught and completely independent.
What was Peggy like as a child?
She was always very, very beautiful. She had a complexion like a peach and wonderful silver flax and golden hair.
How did you get along? Was she an easy child to bring up, or was she difficult?
Well, she never wanted to leave me or her governess. She was very, very insecure.
Can you describe Sinbad for me?
Well, people say he looks like me, but we have no tastes in common. I mean, Peggy was an artist, and we had art in common. He's almost anti-painting. I had a big show of Tongi, and that was one of the most successful ones. We really sold quite a lot of painting.
What was Tony like?
Oh, he was adorable.
Did he paint things for you when he visited you?
Yes, he painted marvelous earrings.
Would you have become such a collector, do you think, if you had not known so many artists personally?
Certainly, definitely.
Well, then which came first? Is it the art or the people, or was it both?
No, the art came first. And the people came because of my idea to have this gallery. By degrees, I met more and more artists.
Do you think that great artists are great people, necessarily?
They're certainly much more interesting than people who aren't intellectual, who aren't interested in the arts, who aren't creative. They're certainly more interesting than business people.
But do they measure up, or do they equal their own work?
Sometimes they're disappointing, but sometimes they're even better than their work. When one meets artists, they turn out to be quite different to what one expects.
Like what he used to say, art is a fraud, and I even say art is a mirage. What I believe in is the artist, the man. So what to do except to let everybody be the individual and be as much of an individual as they can be, and everyone for oneself, like in a shipwreck.
And this suspension only lasted about a year and a half because it became so expensive. I thought it wasn't worthwhile to go on trying to run a commercial gallery because I never sold anything. So I decided it's better to spend the money by having a museum of modern art, which didn't exist in London.
Once she decided to close Guggenheim Shown, she thought she'd invest a great deal more money and make a museum. So she signs up Herbert Reed to inveigle him to leave his position as the Burlington magazine editor and to be the director of her planned future museum in London. And so it was for the opening exhibition that he prepared this list, legendary list, of all the major movements and artists of the 20th century.
But unfortunately, the war came just at that time, and I decided it would be impossible to have a museum in London. It might be bombed any moment.
Most people think that everything the Nazis did was attacking, primarily the Jews. But this was also an attack on modernism. And it culminated in 1937 with an enormous exhibition in Munich called Entartete Kunst, or Degenerate Art. It's kind of amazing that all of this energy went into collecting and bringing together 650 examples of art that people should dislike.
Then, when the war began, you left London.
Oh, I was sent to Paris to collect the pictures on the list that Herbert Reed had made for me. During the first winter of the war, I tried to buy one painting a day.
How did you go about doing that?
Well, I had friends in Paris, Madame Van Duisburg, who was my best friend for years and years. And I had a friend who was a sort of art dealer called Howard Putzel. And I had Marcel Duchamp, who introduced me to artists. So between these three people, I went around on my own and bought things. People telephoned me all day long and even came to my house in the morning and brought me pictures in bed. And actually, the only one I literally bought in bed was this little darling.
She was lucky in her choice of time because in 1939, the artists were desperate to sell things, and a number of the dealers were Jewish and were getting the hell out of Paris before the Germans arrived.
You could have wound up in a concentration camp.
Yes, I know that.
Were you ever afraid you'd be captured by the Germans?
No. It's in my nature to be afraid. During the war, I wanted to buy Brancusi. This is Brancusi's Bird in Space. I think it's one of Brancusi's favorite pieces of sculpture. I used to go and see him almost every day, and he was a marvelous little man, sort of half god and half peasant.
Now, did you have your affair with Brancusi when you went to talk to him about buying the bird?
Yes, the awful thing was I thought if I had an affair with him, the bird would be cheaper. When I went back to take away this bird in space, Brancusi brought it out in his arms, and tears were strolling down his cheeks. And I never knew if it was because he was parting with me or with his favorite bird.
Do you remember Giacometti?
Oh, very well. He was wonderful. He looked like a lion.
Really?
Yes, he had a very big head and shaggy hair. And his conversation was marvelous.
How did you bargain? I mean, how difficult was it to get paintings at that time at the price you were prepared to pay?
Then there wasn't a question of bargaining in those days because everything was so cheap.
She came in at a good moment, I mean, so far as prices were concerned, and she didn't have all that much money to spend. And I think she did spend it rather cleverly and cannily. And God knows she's Guggenheim. She knew how to do those things. I mean, that's one of the things she inherited.
She managed to put together the nucleus of one of the great collections of modern art for the almost laughable sum of $40,000.
For $40,000, you couldn't buy one of the paintings you have in that?
Not today.
Not even one of the 125?
No, not even one, probably. Isn't that crazy?
She just broke all the rules. There weren't that many precedents for women working, let alone working in the arts. It was a very male-dominated field.
It was my freedom, my liberation.
Peggy is a sort of model for the liberated woman, a very disturbed, liberated woman. She did what she wanted to do. She had the means to do it. But I think she really was in advance of her times.
There were other women, and there was above all another American Jewish woman in the form of Gertrude Stein, whose example Peggy may have been following. I think that Peggy would love to have had Gertrude Stein's gifts for words and her extraordinary ability to promote herself.
She liked helping the artists, and she liked being like Gertrude Stein and having a good eye in picking the winners.
She also had the guts to buy Cubist paintings, which in those days were not valued as nearly as highly as they are today. I seem to remember Picasso being rather vague about Peggy. I mean, he heard about her.
She goes to Picasso and tries to buy something there, and he says, "Madame, the lingerie is on the 5th floor."
Clearly, she was courageous in her choices. She stuck to her convictions. She listened to the right people, but she was the subject of ridicule and disparagement a lot of the time. And yet that didn't seem to bother her so much. She just plowed forward.
On the day that Hitler invaded Norway, I walked into Leger's studio and bought a wonderful painting.
And then, this was in 1940, and how did you get all that art out of Paris?
Well, that was very difficult. First of all, I wanted all these things saved and went to talk to the Louvre people because Leger had suggested the Louvre would save these works of art with theirs. And then after I had them all prepared, the Louvre changed their mind and said they weren't worth saving.
And the Louvre was sure that Mondrian wasn't worth saving and Picasso wasn't worth saving?
Exactly.
Oh, how extraordinary. I bet they're sorry now.
You seem to be more concerned about your collection than about yourself.
Oh, I was much more. And I wouldn't leave until I got the pictures out. But finally, a very lucky man who had done all the shipping and packing, so I had the gallery, appeared and arranged the whole thing for me and sent the whole thing as household objects. We had to send sheets and blankets and casseroles and...
Right there in the middle of the war with the submarines and everything.
Incredible, isn't it?
It was a very much a do-it-yourself approach. She had a determination, and I think also there was no time to lose. You know, it was obviously was also the moment of a war. You know, and so it's a story of exiles, of numerous exiles.
I went to Marseille on the Barry and Fry committee because he asked me if I would save certain surrealist painters from Europe. And among these people was Max Ernst and André Breton and all André Breton's family.
She actually helped artists to leave Europe, to New York, to the United States. So she very much saved artists.
One of the surrealist painters with whom you obviously were closely involved was Max Ernst, and he makes a sort of link, doesn't he, between your life in Europe and your life in America again?
I brought Max Ernst to America. Then after Pearl Harbor, I married him.
And Max Ernst was extremely good-looking and very attractive to women. She was much envied for having Max Ernst as a husband. It was a good deed in that, I mean, she got Max out of Europe and to America, and had he been caught by the Germans, he would have been put in a concentration camp for being a modernist artist. I don't think he was at all faithful. I mean, it was a clever career move, and I think that he didn't give a damn for her.
When did you know you were in love with him? When you first saw him, or?
Right away, after a few days.
Was he still beautiful then?
Yes, wonderful. Terribly attractive. Beautiful, beautiful. Had a beautiful body also.
Did Ernst love being the center of attention?
Oh, he thought about nothing else.
Did you remember his remark about he once had a Guggenheim, but it wasn't a fellowship?
Wasn't that funny?
You said that he used to be jealous of your clothes.
He loved clothes. He wanted to dress up always. When I bought a fur coat once, he was so jealous I had to buy him one also.
When Peggy Guggenheim arrives in 1941, the art world was a small kind of gentleman's club, and the story is that you could fit the entire art world in any given run. It's got a lot of people coming here. A lot of Europeans are being displaced by the war.
Miro was here.
Yes, Miro was here.
Léger
yes.
and...
Tanguy, Masson, André Breton, Max Ernst, Mondrian.
Peggy Guggenheim was one of the links between European and American modernism, between surrealism and abstract expressionism.
I think Peggy was a pollinator. She wanted to be widely regarded as a major figure in the art world.
What was life like during those days here with all the expatriate artists in New York?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was terribly stimulating and terribly exciting. Because New York then became the art center of the world. Paris no longer existed in that way.
Which comes first? Peggy Guggenheim, the free thinker who rebels and kind of moves away from home and changes her life? Or Peggy Guggenheim, the person who enters into these spheres, these artistic orbits, where everyone is like that, and certainly informing her of even wilder ways to break the rules?
When Peggy opened Art of the Century on 57th Street in October of '42, she felt very committed to the idea of assembling a collection and opening it to the public. And she saw that by collecting the art of her time, that would set up a path, if you will, toward the future.
Peggy Guggenheim's gallery was one of the first international galleries in New York City, mixing American and European art.
Art of the Century was very much alive.
In terms of American painting, what was the role of your gallery? What would you say it was?
To give birth to it. I was the midwife.
What about Putzel's role in your gallery? It seems to me he was very important in finding
Terribly
people
important. He really ran the whole thing, I suppose. He really influenced me terrifically. I always got hold of the right people.
My first show was under the most ideal circumstances. Would you say it was in Peggy Guggenheim's gallery called Art of this Century?
You remember Motherwell?
Very well, yes.
What impressed you about Motherwell?
He was so intellectual. He used to give lectures in my gallery about the paintings.
The function of abstraction is to get rid of a lot of reality. You start with as much richness as you want and subtract.
Am I an action painter? You know how an artist works. Yeah. For a fleeting second, you know, like a glimpse. I saw somebody sitting on a chair. And then I had this glimpse of this thing. And I got interested in painting that, you see. Yeah. This like frozen glimpse. Well, that's a wonderful sensation to slip into this glimpse. I'm like a slipping glimpser.
Art of the Century was an astonishing innovation. Not only this radical group of artists who were redefining art, but also the space was something that no one had ever imagined before.
What made you think of having a gallery that was all decorated?
Oh, that was because Putzel said, why don't you get Kiesler to give you a few little ideas? And those were the few little ideas created this marvelous gallery.
Frederick Kiesler had been a longtime friend of Duchamp's. He was friends with Mondrian, and he was spiritually the right visionary for Peggy.
What was working with Kiesler like? Was he a little dictator?
Yes.
I gather he was very short.
Tiny little man, yes.
Kiesler and Peggy felt very strongly that her art should be accessible.
All the abstract pictures were hung on poles on universal joints so that you could actually take hold of the picture and turn it, swivel it into the light and so on, and really use it with the same familiarity that one does a library.
That's how people get turned on to art, is that they have an intimate relationship rather than a distant one. And Peggy Guggenheim really understood that.
She's not somebody who just followed movements, but she actually produced reality. She's a reality producer.
Some of the critics referred to the installation as either Coney Island or an amusement park ghost train. And it was a wacky environment.
There was a tape recording of an express train which would go off every few minutes. Lights which would flash on and off. The experience was supposed to be unsettling, dreamlike.
Most people still feel safest in their contemplative gaze when they're in the most sterile white cube possible. The presentation of the art was really radical and still radical today.
But it doesn't surprise me that Peggy Guggenheim was regarded as a black sheep because she really did it on her own. She really was a self-made collector and kind of a self-made person in the broader sense. I mean, she was her greatest creation.
I had a wonderful figure. I was very thin, chestnut hair, green-blue eyes. My nose probably was always too big.
She was one of the first people to have plastic surgery because she hated her nose. And her nose was a disaster.
I love the story about your nose job. Is it quite true?
Absolutely true, yes.
Why would the doctors like...
They couldn't do the one I wanted.
So you just had him stop in the middle?
It was so painful, it was terrible, so I made him stop.
When her nose job was botched, she decided not to ever have it fixed and just to guts it out with this kind of funny face. And I think that was kind of a root of a lot of her complexes.
When you met Peggy, she wasn't at all forward and confident. She was charming, she was socially adept, but you could see that she was quite timid.
She's very insecure. And the way she spoke with very little bit of movement of the mouth, and every once in a while, she would just do something with her tongue. It would come out. You know, I'm sure she was totally unaware of it. The only time that I saw that she really relaxed was she picked up this little sculpture by art.
This is the first sculpture I ever bought.
She became a little more animated. She was happy when she was actually connected to the art.
Peggy made things happen. She did things, and other things happened as a consequence of that. And it was absolutely true in Pollock's career. Peggy must have met Jackson Pollock in the winter of 1942-43, become aware of him. But for somebody used to the sophistications of the European avant-garde, it was very hard to take on board. And it was eventually Mondrian, during the jury session for her so-called Spring Salon in 1943, who pushed Peggy over the top.
Mondrian stood rooted to the spot in front of two paintings. And Peggy went over to him and merely said, "Dreadful, aren't they? They're dreadful. Man has no discipline." And he said, "No, I'd like to look at this some more." She said, "Why?" And Mondrian said, "I have the feeling that I'm looking at some of the most exciting work that I've seen so far in America."
Soon after exhibiting Pollock in her Spring Salon, she offers him his first one-man exhibition and commissions from him what was to be his largest ever painting, a mural for her new address on 61st Street.
I first met Jackson Pollock when he was working as a carpenter in my uncle's museum. So I rescued him from that and ordered a mural for my entrance hall, a very long wall, about 23 feet wide.
The picture seems to repeat itself all over. It's become a staple of abstract painting now, but at the time, that's what it was called, as exalted wallpaper, and then the mural, well, it just goes on and on. That's what made it so good.
Pollock is still taken for this example of far-outism, an artist in the line of Duchamp, someone who knocked you flat with his arbitrariness.
Were there any rivalries between you and Lee Krasner?
No. I was just a patron.
And it never really went beyond that?
Well, once we went to bed together when Lee was away somewhere, which was very unsuccessful, and he threw his drawers out the window.
I don't remember it.
I wouldn't put that in my book for anything in the world.
You said that you had been pushed out of your historical position.
Yes, that was true. At the time, felt very strongly that they both were very ungrateful.
Pollock was a very self-destructive character, and Peggy Guggenheim made an investment of genius. Once she was convinced of Pollock's importance, she gave him an income, she lent him the money to buy a house out in Springs, Long Island. Having the peace and the quiet and the distance from the social scene opened up a space for him, and he was truly working as an artist in full command.
He had a lot more control than the myth would have. He could fling a skein of paint with the accuracy of a cowboy with a lasso.
I gave him the small sum of $300 a month. God knows how he lived on it and painted on it and bought canvases, but I suppose in those days it was a great deal more than it would be today. And he immediately bloomed forth and became what I consider one of the great artists of the 20th century.
Does she make Jackson Pollock famous? No. Life magazine makes him famous. But she's there beforehand in a really significant way, and she is allowing this sense of a more heroic, larger-than-life version of art, which was not the old school way of doing it.
I'm connected to Peggy Guggenheim in relation to Art of the Century because my mother showed with her, my father showed with her. First time my father showed was 1945 at the Autumn Salon. And my mother had her first one-man show with Peggy in 1946. When I was 3.
Did you give any shows to women? Just one-man shows?
A lot of women.
Another really important exhibition that Peggy did was called 31 Women. The first time that there'd ever been an exhibition devoted only to women artists, both American and European.
I think it was the first show of exclusive women artists ever. And it was, Louise Nevelson and Leonora Carrington and Merritt Oppenheim and so on. It was a remarkable show.
Peggy was a sister in a lot of ways. She had a lot of really close female friends, and despite all of her activity with various men, at the end of the day, she really believed very strongly in women.
She marries Max Ernst, but she's hardly his only wife. And in fact, he meets his next wife, Dorothea Tanning, curating a show for Peg's Place.
The 31 women clinched it. I thought I only should have had 30 women, not 31 women. That was my mistake.
Artists' narcissism, art above all, art more than life, led to problems.
Max just wasn't in love with me. He was in love with Leonora Carrington terribly. And then afterwards he fell in love with Dorothea Tanning. And I was sort of sandwiched in between and never loved, I think.
Gala Dali once criticized you for sacrificing your life to art.
I never gave up collecting and running my gallery and looking after the artists. When I was married to Max Ernst, even I continued. Probably didn't help the marriage very much, but I continued nevertheless.
Peggy Guggenheim was a lonely lady. I sensed that, and I invited her to come for a simple meal. And she was so grateful because nobody ever thought that they should invite the great Peggy Guggenheim just for a common, ordinary pasta dinner or something. And so she and I became quite friendly. I think that in many ways she didn't understand how much others tried to exploit her. And they did, they really did, and took advantage of her like mad, including artists. That's why I called her charmingly naive.
Peggy and I were very good friends. She was a very open, genuine person. She was completely without any guile. She had no hidden agenda. You could always assume that what she said was what she really meant. And she wrote exactly the way she spoke.
Everybody went mad when I wrote that book. I had 25 dreadful criticisms. They were terrible. They were very funny, though.
I read that your family was very much up in arms, and they called it Out of Her Head.
I don't see why they should have been so upset, because I didn't say anything awful about the Guggenheims. My book was all about fucking.
On many levels, it's a very brilliant, insightful book. Getting the record clear and her feeling clear was very bold, very daring.
I think our motivation in writing about exactly what she'd done and who she slept with was because she didn't really care who knew, because it was just part of her innate being that it was. She wasn't ever covering anything up.
I came and spent the night with Paul Bowles once. That I don't put in my book that I had an affair with him, but I think it's pretty obvious. And we lay on a fur on the ground, and he put perfume on my wrists, and it all sounds very sort of sexy, doesn't it?
Very exotic.
Yes.
Was he very exotic?
Yes, very.
Many of the men with whom she hung out were extremely promiscuous, but she was talked about as such a slut for doing the same thing that all the men around her were doing. That Mary McCarthy story is all about her promiscuity.
And Mary saw her as a wonderful target, and she wrote this merciless short story about Peggy. It's called The Cicerone. Polly Grab, I think she's called. And she talks about her life was a series of skids on banana peels, as represented by the various lovers she'd had. It's a bit two-dimensional and a little too
McCarthy, how friendly were you with her? She
Oh,
wrote
very,
something-
very friendly, yeah.
Because I think she'd written that story to
Which I didn't like her very much, no.
No.
No, we don't mean.
Mary McCarthy was hardly a Puritan herself, so why would that be the thing she focused on? Well, everyone focused on that. And I don't think Peggy Guggenheim did anything to discourage that focus. I mean, she was quite proud of it.
She had a really good dose of sexual energy, which was transmitted in her personal life and art. She definitely detects the man who she wants on her terms. So refreshing.
Did you ever have an affair with Mondrian?
No, never. I don't think it was true, because when I went to a studio one night and they showed me his paintings, and then he kissed me. And when he kissed me, he had an erection, which surprised me very much for someone that age.
How old was he?
About 70, yes.
I wondered if you ever had any women lovers.
But maybe I had sex once or twice with women, but nothing that meant anything to me at all. I've never told anybody all these things before. I hope they don't all appear in print, or my lovers, I'll die of it.
I was wondering about that. What if people like John Cage's wife did not know about this? I mean,
No use putting that in, because I only slept with them once.
I found her attractive. There was this extraordinary sense of self. There's something really beautiful about an older woman who knows who she is, who has a great accomplishment. That already is sexy.
I think Peggy had a very strange sort of form of sexiness. She didn't exude sexuality, but she had a kind of sexual aura that people did respond to, and she was a kind of a mixture of old-fashioned and very, very modern.
She was kind of testy if people assumed that she would tell you dirty stories or talk about sex or things like that. I think she's a little like a character in Proust called Madame de Villeparisis, who, when she's young, recklessly throws away her reputation and thinks it's fun to do that. And then when she's older, she spends all of her time trying to recover her lost position. And I think Peggy was a little like that. Assembling a great collection and starting a museum, all of that was something that would preserve her name, and that's what she wanted to do.
She was a Guggenheim, and she had the ego of a Guggenheim. And she had a certain authority about her. And people were very impressed by her name. I mean, she used the Guggenheim name to good ends, and she'd carved out a niche for herself, and she filled it, and she seemed to be doing it very well.
Do you often actually run into paintings that you know you sold?
I find them in museums, which upsets me very much, because I realize I shouldn't have sold them.
You can't be a dealer and not sell.
I didn't sell because I was a dealer. I sold because I had enough money to run the gallery.
When did you decide to close the gallery?
I guess in 47. I'd always wanted to come back to Europe. I never meant to stay in America.
When Peggy Guggenheim left New York, in some ways, her reputation obscured her accomplishment. That her personality, what Clement Greenberg talks about as her gaiety, those were actually negatives. But I think even Greenberg knew enough to put that aside and say that she identified key artists in the New York School. She showed them first. She helped build their career. She helped to make it possible for them to do their work, and that was a huge accomplishment.
There is no normal life in Venice. Here everything and everyone floats. It is this floatingness which is the central quality of Venice. The reflections are like paintings, more beautiful than any painted by the greatest masters.
Venice was really a place of passage. And so for someone like her to choose a place like Venice doesn't come at all as a surprise. The place really calls for that mix of people coming and going. However, what made her, I think, so different is that she stayed.
I can understand coming back to Paris or to London, but why?
I couldn't go to London because I was afraid of my memoirs would cause me too much trouble. So I came to Venice, which I'd always adored, which had been my dream city. And then I thought if I bought a palace here, it'd be a very good place to put the pictures. And it took me several years to find the right palace. At last, I could achieve my dream.
She thought it was a very funny little palace that she lived in because it didn't have a second floor. And she got it at a bargain, I think, right after the war. I mean, it didn't cost her much.
I think Peggy's great achievements in Venice all stemmed from lending her collection to the Biennale when it reopened after World War II in 1948. Douglas and I went to Venice at that time to pay a call on Peggy. Now, this was a very tricky call to pay because Douglas had written about Peggy's loan of her collection, and Douglas had ripped it apart and said this was a typical of the bad taste of rich American women who didn't know what they were buying. But Peggy was very forgiving, so we were very warmly received. I think she'd helped bring international modern art to Venice, and this had an enormous effect on the future of the Biennale.
There were always a tumble of dogs around her feet, like thistledown, 5 or 6 of them whom she adored.
You said that you had 57 dogs.
All in the house, yes.
Did you give them away? Or
I gave most of them away. I sold 2 or 3 maybe. I thought they were all the same breed and then realized little by little that they were different breeds. I have a friend, she had Shih Tzus, and I had Lhasa Terriers, and I didn't know the difference for years.
You've had everybody in your house. I mean, it's unbelievable. I like it when they draw something. Or
Yes, I do. I much better.
Steinberg. Oh, I love all the doggies.
Aren't they wonderful?
Would you think you're very gregarious?
No, I'm not at all gregarious. I'm a lone wolf. I used to love parties, though, it's true.
It was so enjoyable staying with Peggy because all kinds of things went on. There were incidents, there were rows, there was fun. She enjoyed having a lot of gay guys around her because they were always looking for young guys. And she also was one of the gang in that respect. But the food was the worst in Venice. I mean, you know, lunch at Peggy's, it was the bad pasta, cheapest wine. I mean, really quite awful.
I don't think that food or drink really mattered to her. She was a gourmet of life, not of food. And the food was pretty terrible.
Peggy was legendarily cheap. Sinbad once said she could make a can of sardines go very, very far, to which Peggy said yes, especially if you don't open it.
I think that I'd been hard on her in a way, but saying that she was chintzy. She had to be chintzy because, I mean, she was infinitely ambitious when it came to buying paintings and living well and having a palazzo and all that. But on the other hand, what was so touching about Peggy, at heart, she was a little girl. And she had a little girl's enthusiasm about her possessions and wanting to show them.
I don't think it goes with my hair. This is my bedroom with the colder bed.
Peggy wants to replace this old brass bed she has with something genius. And she has this, remarkable idea to ask my grandfather to make a headboard in hammered silver like his beautiful jewelry. And he doesn't do it. And so she's after him all the time.
And one day I met him at a party, and I said, "Sandy, why haven't you made my bed?" Whereupon his wife looked extremely surprised, picked up her ears, and said, "What does that mean?" So finally, I got my bed.
There were constant tryouts for the role of lover. I mean, there were local boys. I remember when Nellie van Doesburg, the widow of van Doesburg, the Dutch modernist painter, came to stay, and Peggy was adding on a few rooms to the palazzo. So there were a lot of rather good-looking young Italian stonemasons and plasterers around. And Nellie and Peggy both lusted after the same young plasterer. And there were terrible shrieks and rows and so on.
I remember she would like to laugh about her Marino Marini statue in front of her palace with the detachable penis, which she would take off when the cardinal would visit her.
Marino Marini explained to me that it was not at all a sexual symbol, but simply the ecstasy of a young man in the joy of living.
So few people single-handedly start out to make a museum.
Yes. After trying all over the world, I finally accomplished it here. Since 1951, we opened the museum. It's supposed to be the greatest attraction in Venice. Even before St. Mark's, some people come here.
One thing I remember clearly when I was about 18, I hitchhiked all over Europe. When I got to Venice, I went to Peggy Guggenheim's palazzo, where she had a museum. I knew my mother had a painting there. So I walked in and I looked to the right. The first thing I saw was hers. I introduced myself to Peggy and we talked. She was a big part of their lives. She was a patron of theirs.
I didn't ask you when you started to help writers and artists out.
I started with Juna Barnes. I'm giving an allowance to her ever since.
Still to this day?
Yes.
I think when you were beginning, there weren't things like there are now, fellowships and scholarships. Nothing. So what you were doing was, very unusual and very needed.
Art patron is more important than art collector, because art patron is supporting your work, also supporting the projects who are not sellable at the moment, but they're very important projects for the development of your work. And it's really somebody who supports a long term.
You seem to have given help and support to artists. Do you think that they've repaid you sufficiently well?
Well, I didn't expect to be repaid. I think the fact that they have created and given so much to humanity on the whole is enough. I didn't expect any personal thing in exchange. It's enough to enjoy their paintings.
I think my father, Sinbad, had an intense relationship with his mother, Peggy. I think it was a love-hate relationship. Her life commitment happened to be her collection and not her children. I adored my father, Sinbad. He was quite a character. He was a very avid sportsman. I think it was his way of breaking away from the art world He ended up working for an insurance company. My father never spoke about his sister Peggy. I think it was a very sore subject, a very painful subject for him.
I have kept this room as a memorial to Peggy with 13 or 14 of her paintings. She wanted to be like me all the time. That was her great ideal, I think.
People who knew her said there was something just vacant, something you knew was just not right with Peggy. And Peggy was very troublesome as a young woman and was already having affairs at a very early age. Peggy was very intrusive in Peggy's relationships. I think she expected Peggy to be this beautiful love goddess who had many affairs and would go from man to man in a way that Peggy fantasized about. Though she loved her, she simply didn't know how to be a mother to Peggy.
She was always a very unhappy girl and terribly neurotic. She used to have these crazy fits all the time. She used to get terribly wrought up about things and scream at me and get furious with me and tell me she's going to break up the whole house. Not normal at all.
Peggy was a tremendous problem in those days. I'll never forget Peggy. We were all having dinner, and Peggy rushed in, covered in blood, followed by a man in a white dinner jacket, covered in blood. And she tried to commit suicide, and he'd saved her, but they all seemed to be perfectly happy about this, and they were kissing and making it up.
It was a kind of regular occurrence, the suicide attempts. She told me she only felt safe in a plane, because I suppose she hoped it would crash.
She married this awful creature whom I couldn't stand, whom I absolutely loathed. He was dreadful. He was a psychopath, a drunken psychopath. A mess broke up our relationship because I wouldn't see him and then she wouldn't see me.
I didn't often speak to her about Peggy because it was such a painful subject for her. But I did once ask her if she felt that she'd ever managed to get it right with Peggy, and she said never. She said she'd tried everything. She tried to be soft and to be hard and to be strict, and to be permissive and to be generous and to be controlling, and she said she could never find the right way.
We adored each other. We were like lovers almost, most close relationship. That's why it was so painful. She did it when she could be saved. That's how her husband let her down, by not saving her.
With all the difficulties in her life, her personal problems, her family problems, was the art finally compensation enough for all of that?
What do these pictures mean to you yourself?
Oh, they've become more or less the most important part of my life. I can't imagine now living without them. I had my revenge later on, of course, when I had my show at the Orangerie in Paris, which is part of the Louvre, and I was very happy that I was recognized.
She had the enormous pleasure of going there and mentioning in her speech that her pictures had not been worth saving before the war, but now they were worth showing, and I think that was lovely.
I was in Venice. It was my first Biennale. I think I was 23 years old. And I was invited to come and see the collection. You know, as a young gallery owner, Peggy Guggenheim was a mythic person. There's a lovely thing about helping young people. She discovered extraordinary artists and nurtured them, some of the great artists of our time. But
it wasn't about money. It was just about art.
You donated a lot of paintings to museums.
Millions, millions, millions.
So you've given away.
I've given away over 20 Pollocks.
My goodness.
This, of course, is a Pollock of that period when art of the century was at its height, and we were all seeing him for the first time. In those days, what were Pollocks selling for?
Oh, nothing at all. A few $100, maybe $600 for one the size, but would have been already a very good price.
It must make you very proud.
No, I think it's completely insane the way it's gone up in value. Museum directors used to come and tell me this picture's worth so much and that picture's worth so much, and I knew they had a fit. I thought of what a responsibility it was to have these expensive pictures. I didn't like it at all.
Some of these prices are subjective because they're so rare. You know, there might be a number of opinions as to what they're worth, but you're talking billions, billions of dollars, billions.
She was being courted at the end of her life by a number of institutions who wanted the collection.
Her one requirement was that the collection stay in Venice.
I don't think she had the resources to endow it, so luckily she had a rich uncle.
When I went to New York to have the exhibition in '69, it was like proposing to somebody who was dying to marry me. I wanted to leave it to the Guggenheims, and they wanted me to leave it to them, but neither of us knew that it was going to happen until during the show we decided that. I guess I thought they were the only people who would look after them after my death.
And how do you feel about walking down the ramp at the Guggenheim Museum and seeing your paintings in a completely different environment?
Oh, my uncle's garage, yes. It looks like a garage, doesn't it? I mean, all that circular business is the way garages are built in Europe, on circular ramps.
Nice to have an uncle with a garage like that.
I know was on very good terms with my uncle, Mr. Solomon. I think if he saw this now, he'd turn in his grave.
By making the agreement that her collection would be part of the foundation created by her uncle, that was an extraordinary step. It was the first step where you had a major cultural institution that was spread over continents. But it also had a huge influence on the development of Venice itself. Venice is now viewed as, of course, the city of history, but also very much the city of contemporary art.
She was smart because by keeping it there, it really ensured that her personal presence was always going to be felt. And I think that that's the most important aspect about going into that museum today, is that you feel her.
You only have 3 museums you can visit. This would definitely be one. It's like a pilgrimage. Is everything 20th century is about, should be about? It's just this incredible personal journey. It's about an opinion, it's about a taste, it's about a choice. All these things that most museums are not about. To me, it's her biggest contribution to history.
She was collecting because she was really attracted to this art. She found something of herself in it. She had tremendous courage. She had the courage of her conviction. She was ready to take a risk. And she also understood intuitively its art historical significance.
Looking at Peggy Guggenheim and what she accomplished, my biggest takeaway is just hold on to the art. Great art is eternal. And if you can attach yourself to it in the right way, and see, she certainly did it in the right way, you kind of gain a certain immortality.
Everything used to be much more fun than it is nowadays.
Do you ever miss your turbulent days?
Yes, of course I miss them.
Do you wish you still had Max or Subretron expounding?
No, I wish I were young enough to have lovers. I wouldn't want a Max Ernst in my life, my God, no. I can't be jealous of the past. Only of the future. It's horrible to get old. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you. But I really felt I've accomplished what I wanted to do, and I've done it very successfully, and I'm very happy about that.
What a colourful life the black sheep of the family led. Next tonight to the Wild West with Ray Mears, who explores how the early settlers survived the challenges of the mountain ranges of the frontier.